It's a huge pleasure to see you here all in Warsaw, in the beating heart of the European Union. It's wonderful to be coming to the stage after Luca, after Radek, and after Magdalena, and to bring this family back together again. A brutal moment for the world, but also a really existential one for Europe. We spent several years preparing for this moment at ECFR. We set up a US program because we decided that we needed to start understanding an America that was much more complicated, much more alien to us than the one that most governments had assumed would be there when managing the transatlantic relationship. We set up new strands of work on geoeconomics, on defense, on technology, and the geopolitics of the energy transition. We have been building out our work on European and global politics through our polling exercises. And I spent 6 months in the United States and working with our US program, trying to understand some of the new forces that were coming our way. And as part of the backdrop to organising this conference today, we just done a really big opinion poll, which Ivan Krastev and I wrote a report on. And I'm just going to talk through some of the findings because I think they're very relevant to a lot of the discussions we're going to be having over the next couple of days. And I'm going to hopefully, so we called it Trump's European Revolution, and it's based on the fact that when Donald Trump was elected to a second term as President of the United States, he launched a political revolution, and like all revolutions, the goal was not just about changing policies and institutions, but the identity of the country and all of the parties and the people who live in it. And in just 6 months, the United States shifted from being a champion of liberal democracy and free trade to becoming the lodestar for illiberalism and protectionism on the global stage. But the main point of our survey, what comes out very strongly from it, is that this revolution which Donald Trump launched in the United States has now come to Europe and is having a similar impact on our identities. It's upending both our domestic politics, but also our sense of what our geopolitical situation is. We did this survey in 12 different countries around Europe. There are about 16,000 people who answered it. And I'm going to talk you through very briefly some of the main findings, both how Trump and his second coming are changing domestic politics in Europe, but also how they are feeding into a new geopolitical consciousness across the continent. So I'll start with the domestic politics. And our first finding really is that he has completely upended a lot of the key political divisions and the projects associated with many of our parties. We did a big opinion poll last year around the world just after the US elections, which showed that most people around the world thought that Trump would be good for Americans, good for peace in the world, and good for their own country. The one exception to that rule were America's closest partners who were freaking out about his election, and nowhere more than Europe. And what this poll shows is that Europeans have got, if anything, more worried over the last few months since he came to power. And you can see that there's a lot of red on this map when you ask people about whether Trump is good for America, good for peace in the world, or good for their own countries. In some very, very Atlanticist countries like the UK, only 12% of people think that Trump is good for America. So it shows that there is a glass ceiling to the support of political parties that are associated with Trump. But I think what's even more interesting is if you go beneath these headline figures for countries, you can see new dynamics emerging. Unlike in 2003, when Europe was split between pro and anti-American countries at the time of Iraq, what you now have are a split between pro-Trump parties and anti-Trump parties. And that is leading to a recasting of European politics. Oops, sorry. One which is really quite dramatic. On the one hand, what you're seeing is a big change in the way that populist parties are thinking about themselves. In the past, they were seen as national defenders of sovereignty, while mainstream parties were post-sovereign globalists. Well, now what you're seeing, the populist parties are no longer simply anti-system parties. They're part of a transnational Trumpist movement, and the far-right leaders in many countries feel the need both to copy Trump's actions on everything from immigration to blowing up of national bureaucracies, but also to defend what Trump is doing. And on the other hand, leaders of many mainstream parties are now offering to defend national sovereignty from these attacks on the political integrity of our continent. And as a result, many mainstream parties, supporters, seem to be rallying around the European flag. So you have this kind of strange reverse relationship between perceptions of the US, which have become much more ideological, in the EU, which wasn't there before. Today, to be pro-American means almost to be against the EU, whilst being pro-European means being critical of Trump's America. And in that sense, it is possible that Trump could be a bit like Brexit. In the first instance, it empowered a lot of populist parties around Europe and gave them a sense that they could win. But over time, it created a big dilemma for them because of the disaster of Brexit actually led to people questioning their ability to offer a vision for their country, and created a glass ceiling on their rise by associating them with those sorts of problems. So you could see both kind of challenges for a lot of these populist parties, but also an opportunity for mainstream party leaders to be more than simply defenders of the status quo. Now, just going to look briefly at the geopolitical dimension. And there, the transformation of Europe's sense of itself is maybe even more dramatic than what's happened in domestic politics. And the simple thing that Trump's election has done, coming so shortly after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, is to lead to a real sense of insecurity around Europe and to force Europeans to take their security seriously. So we asked this poll about different negative scenarios, and what it shows is that wherever people live, whether it's in north, south, east, or west of Europe, Europeans are very anxious. Some worry about a Russian attack, others worry about nuclear conflict, others worry about World War III. But there is an overwhelming sense of insecurity, which is prevalent in all the countries that we surveyed. And that has policy consequences. Firstly, it leads to, in every single country that we polled, apart from Italy, at least a plurality of people who think that defense spending has to increase in their countries. In some countries, you have a majority of people who are even in favor of reintroducing conscription, mandatory military service. Though it should be said that the one group in most of those countries that wasn't in favor of it were people of fighting age, young people. And maybe even more dramatically, there is a new debate about nuclear deterrence and the role that nuclear deterrence should play in their countries. And what you see is very large numbers of people, majorities in some countries, in favor even of developing a national nuclear deterrent. And some of these figures are quite extraordinary. Almost 40% of Germans in favor of developing a national nuclear deterrent. But maybe even most dramatic is the findings that we have on Ukraine, which that slide doesn't seem to be here. But we found a majority of people in all the different countries who wanted to make sure that whatever the US does, Europeans carried on offering military support to Ukraine to stop moves to force Ukraine to give up territory or to lift economic sanctions on Russia. The only exception was Hungary on sanctions to Russia, but even Hungary was against stopping support in the other areas. So for Europeans, I think there is a widespread consciousness that an outright Russian victory in Ukraine would be an existential threat for Europeans, and that preserving Ukraine as a sovereign state with a credible armed forces is one of the best substitutes for declining US military guarantees. Oops, sorry. What's that? Okay. So there is, however, a limit to the faith which Europeans have in their. Sorry, we seem to have an older version of the presentation up here. There is, however, a limit to the amount of confidence that Europeans have in their ability to become strategically autonomous, even as they move from Venus to Mars. And what you can see is that a large number of people doubt Europe's ability to compete economically with the US and China, to become military independent from the US, and to overcome its internal divisions, which shows that whilst there is a very strong consensus on the direction of travel, there is a fear that we won't be able to do it quickly enough, which is leading to a degree of realism about what is going on. So what lessons can ECFR draw from this? What lessons should we draw from it as a community? Well, I think the two main operational lessons that we've drawn about it as ECFR, which hopefully lead into the work that we're going to be doing in the future, firstly is that it is absolutely essential to carry on doing more work, trying to understand the political situation, which is reshaping our politics, both in our continent, but also around the world. I think that we're at a moment which feels in some ways similar to the situation after the 30s with Roosevelt and Keynes, or in the 1970s with Thatcher and Reagan, where a new political consensus was emerging, which shaped the contours of politics in a different way and shaped what kind of decisions people needed to make. And if we want to make all of the visions that we heard from our hosts here in Warsaw become a reality, is going to be a very radical political challenge to win over public support across our continent. And we can see from what's happened in the US how essential it is to win those battles if you want to have the kind of Europe that we want to face. So we're going to carry on doing much more work trying to understand these new dynamics and the forces. But secondly, we need to double down on our attempts to help Europeans think geopolitically, and that has implications for all the regional programs that we're doing, that are doing incredible work on a lot of the dangerous zones around the European continent that we're going to hear from a lot over the next couple of days. But we've also decided to beef up the cross-cutting work that we're doing, and one of the most exciting decisions we made is to launch a new program on European security under the leadership of Nicu Popescu and Jana Kobzova, and which has already gathered a lot of intellectual firepower, including figures like Dmytro Kuleba, who are working on a lot of the challenges that we're facing. They're going to look at the lessons that we can learn from the war in Ukraine, how we drive forward our rearmament, but above all, how we can prepare European institutions, governments, and the public for a world of unpeace where we need to act with much greater urgency and much greater determination. They've already started producing some fascinating work, including their latest report, which we just published, called Preventing the Next War, a European Plan for Ukraine. And I'd like to invite the three of them to come up here onto the panel to launch a discussion which is going to be the formal launch of this program. So maybe you can join me in welcoming them to the